Hi, welcome you all to this special class on Unacademy YouTube platform Unlock. Today we will be discussing one of the important topics in our Indian economy. Uh, in, Today, we'll be looking at this very important topic, inclusive growth, as part of in our discussion of Indian economy. Right? So let us look at first Akash. You know, I cannot take economy in Hindi. It is language problem. As I said, I won't be able to know all those technical terms of economy in Hindi. So that makes it more difficult for me. You know, that is the problem. And it is my inability. I can speak Hindi. I can do conversations in Hindi, but teaching is different thing, Akash. Especially these technical subjects like economy. They're very difficult. Uh, so it becomes difficult for me. Anyway, thank you very much. You can. That is the reason why what I'm doing is even when I'm speaking in English, I'm making sure that I'm not using unnecessarily complicated words and technical jargon, so that it becomes easier for everyone to understand. Right? That is what at best I can do. So let us proceed and look at some of the courses offered on an academy platform. As you can see it on the screen here, crack UPSC CSE GS with India's largest learning platform. You can get plus subscriptions and access unlimited live and recorded courses from India's best educators. You can get subscription by using our code PKS10. Then proceeding further, let us look at some of these important India's best educators are there here on an academy platform. You can see all of them here in topmost educators for civil examination. Then today we'll be discussing Indian economy, and the subtopic is inclusive growth and achievements. I don't think we need to mention about all these things. And you can join an academy Telegram channel as well as a community link also. This offer of 20% discount on all courses on an academy platform has been extended till today. So today is the last date to take benefit out of this courses, right? And you make sure that you are taking the admission today itself. In uh, so that you know you can get a 20% discount on all the courses offered on an academy platform. You can take admission using our code PKS10, right? Then proceeding further, this today is the last day, so you better do it very fast. Today is the last day. Then as I said, these are the kind of discounts that you will be getting on an academy platform. These are kind of discounts you are getting on an academy platform. You can see that you know for 12 months course plus combo offer, it is 61,184 rupees to 684 rupees. But on an academy right now, if you are taking admission today, it is only 49,348 rupees, and we are saving 12,336 rupees. To give comparison here, in Old Nagar in Delhi, where all of us have our coaching institutions, for classroom, they are charging only for general studies around 2 lakh rupees, and for optional a minimum 50,000 rupees, and you are getting both general studies and to optional for around 49,348 rupees, less than 50,000 rupees, which is one fifth of what you will be getting in otherwise classrooms. Obviously, you have a huge amount of price advantage. On top of it, you will also have what we call there's a good number of teachers from to choose from while taking classes. Iconic subscription, you will have otherwise normal price is 78,000 is 994 rupees. You will get it only for 63,195 rupees, and you will be saving 15,799 rupees. Today is the last date, so you better take admission today itself. Similarly, for all other courses, 18 months, 24 months, and 36 months, you can use our code PKS10 to get admission into all these courses. Yes, Kushi and Ram, good morning to all of you. Then, for the first time, Unacademy is extending a CSE prelims practice booklet offer. This offer is valid for both Iconic and Plus subscriptions for 1 year and above, wherein you will get booklets with 10,000 plus more questions for prelims practice. 10 printed booklets worth 7,500 rupees, and you will also get previous year's questions. This offer is valid only till today. As I keep on saying, you better use this offer. Take this offer, and you can benefit out of it. Then proceeding further, you can take admission here in using our code UPSC CSE Combat. That is, I think, tomorrow at 11 a.m., wherein you have 56 questions in 60 minutes, and you can win prizes worth 4 crore rupees. Again, questions are curated by top educators of Unacademy. You have live test with gamified experience also. Real-time ranking to check your performance. It is available in both Hindi and English. As usual, you can use our code PKS10 to take admission into these courses. Unacademy Lite, this is a test series wherein again curated by top educators, complete syllabus coverage, in-depth analysis, and more than 55,000 enrollments, 4.6 ratings by the learners. Identify your weak areas and you can prepare in the same manner. And then finally, this interview, what we call it as last mile. It is a free comprehensive guidance and interview guidance program for 2021. 170 plus top rankers are selected last year. Training by experts, staff analysis free for all eligible aspirants, and flexible schedules, mock interview with experienced panel. Previous year's transcripts are also available. And you have benefits with Iconic subscription also, wherein you can have a one-on-one live mentorship. Then you have a mains question answer practice, study planner, and open house with the educators also. Don't have to worry about the finances also, because you can get everything through loans with 0% EMI also. It will be approved in 2 hours time. Minimal paperwork and flexible tenures. So this is what about the courses offered on Unacademy platform. Let us come back and look at the topic that we have to discuss today. As I said, today we will be discussing this very important topic, inclusive growth and planning. This topic is very important from your mains point of view. Of course, good number of questions are asked in your prelims also from this topic. And what are we discussing as part of this topic? As you can see it on the screen here, we will be discussing about, we will be raising some of these important questions. Why inclusive growth is important for India? What are the different components of inclusive growth? And then how to achieve those inclusive growth? These are all the things that we will try to discuss as part of our class today. Why it is important, and what are the different components of inclusive growth, and what are the measures taken by the government of India to ensure inclusive growth. That is what we will be discussing. So let us start with the first question then. Why inclusive growth is important for India? As you can see it on the screen here, top 1% of our population has more than 70% of GDP under their ownership. Top 1% of our population controls 70% of GDP, right? That is what we say. Uh, then if you look at it, bottom 50% has less than again 10% of GDP. So as you can see it here, only 3 states in our country have 90% of FDI attracted by the entire country. We have 28 states and 7 union territories, 35, and out of which only 3 states account for 90% of FDI, which clearly shows the kind of the kind of inequalities. And what happened with Corona is that these inequalities are getting widened, especially in terms of income and wealth. As you must have been reading in the newspapers all the time that during this 2 years of Corona period, how these inequalities have sharpened. These are all very telling statistics that we are talking about now. Top 150 billionaires in India, top 150 richest people in India, their incomes have increased by 35 lakh crores. Can you imagine? Top 150 people in India, top 150 billionaires in India, their incomes have gone up by 50 lakh crores. Sorry, 30 lakh crores, 35 lakh crores. Top 150 billionaires. And talk about the bottom. 86% of our population, not one or two, 86% of our population have seen their per capita incomes going down during this Corona period. Not one or two. 86% of our people have seen their per capita income going down. So what is happening in India at this point of time? At this point of time, what is happening is that the kind of economic growth that is taking place in our country is such that rich people are becoming richer, whereas poor people are getting more into poverty, poorer. And we say that both absolute poverty and relative poverty are going up in India. I'll give you one more statistics here to explain this. During this reform period, it is said that India has removed around 280 million people from below poverty line. 280 million people were removed from below poverty line during this reform period, thanks to the 9% growth rate that we have achieved. And it is said that during this Corona period of 2 years, more than 260 million people went again below poverty line. That means whatever the success that we have achieved over a period of 30 years, 3 decades of liberalization, what is the success that we have achieved over a period of 3 decades of our liberalization, was completely wiped out because of 2 years of Corona. That is what we say. It was completely wiped out because of the 2 years of Corona. And if you happen to see today's newspaper also, today is the 30th of April, if you happen to see the today's newspaper, RBI, Reserve Bank of India, has said that it would take India at least till 2050 for us to recover from this Corona. 2050. And during this period, we can expect around 6 to 6.5%, or maximum it can go up to 8% growth rate. We can never go back to the 9% growth rate that we have achieved during the first decade of this millennium. So you can see how difficult the task is. Another important indicator of this absence of inclusive growth is what we call the jobless growth. Jobless growth. As a country, as we discussed yesterday in our class extensively, as we discussed yesterday, what we are witnessing is what we call this jobless growth. The reasons are many, but the consequence is the same. What we are witnessing is jobless growth. Income elasticity of growth, employment elasticity of growth is only going down in India. Next, that is the reason why we say inclusive growth is important. You cannot attain sustainable development and growth with this kind of widening inequalities. When rich people become richer and poor people become poorer. Let us proceed further and let us look at these things mostly from economics point of view. For example, this is what we say about any economy, whatever may be the economy, developed or developing or poor, anything. In any economy, we have two classes of people, rich and poor. And what is the difference between them in terms of economic parameters? Rich people are savers and poor people are spenders. You take the case of rich people, all their needs are fulfilled, basic needs. In economics, we talk about the three different levels of needs, three different kinds of needs that people have. What are they? Necessities. Second one is comforts. Third one is luxuries. For example, to understand from the point of view of a layman, what are these necessities? That is what we say, roti, kapda or makan. These are all necessities. You need food, you need health, you need a house to live in, you need clothes. These are the bare necessities of our life, without which we cannot survive. Then what are comforts and what are luxuries? Comforts are like air conditioners. Comforts are like there's LED television screens. Comforts are like having a two-wheelers. Comforts are having a very good spacious house. These are all comforts. That is what we say middle class comforts. And third one is luxuries. These luxuries are for the rich people, extremely rich people. You talk about diamonds, you talk about gold, you talk about big houses, you talk about luxurious cars, whose price is 5 crores for one car. You talk about the private aircrafts, you talk about yachts. These are all what we call luxuries. Now, if you look at it, these necessities are important for everyone, whether you are a rich person or a poor person. They are, they're important because they are needed for you to survive. Now, if you look at it, when it comes to rich people, their necessities, comforts and luxuries, all their needs are fulfilled. So what do? The rich people, if they have more income, they will save more income. They do not spend income because all their needs are fulfilled. All their needs are fulfilled. For example, you have 4 cars. Just because you have more money, will you have 10 cars, 20 cars? That's a different thing. Of course, if you are a Mukesh Ambani, you will have 120 cars. Mukesh Ambani in a garage, he has more than 120 vehicles, all top end vehicles. But that is Mukesh Ambani, not ordinary people. We are talking about ordinary people. So obviously, the demand gets saturated for rich people. This demand gets saturated for rich people. After some time, the demand gets saturated for rich people. So where does the demand in the economy comes from? The demand in the economy comes mostly from poor people and middle class people. Because they are the ones who are seeking necessaries and comforts. For example, in rural areas, if you are a farmer, you have good crop, then you want to buy, one air conditioner, one refrigerator, one color television, and then you want to buy, a tractor for yourself. You want to buy, a small vehicle for yourself, two-wheelers. And if you have more money, you think about buying a small car for yourself. That is what we say here. So the demand in the economy mostly comes from these poor and middle class sections of society. And this is what we call in economics consumption demand. Right? This is what we call in economics consumption demand. Another demand in our economy is what is called investment demand. That means these rich people, industrialists, entrepreneurs, they will demand money for investment purposes. Poor people demand money for consumption purposes, and rich people demand money for what we call investment purposes. That means when there is demand for goods and services by the when there is demand for goods and services by the when there is demand for goods and services by the poor and middle class people, who has to produce them? They have to be produced by rich people. They have to produce by rich people, right? And to produce them, they require money. To invest in industries, they require money. To invest in factories, they require money. That is what is called investment demand. So what we say in economics here is that this investment demand is what is called a derived demand. It is not direct demand. It is derived demand. It is derived from consumption demand. That means in any economy, if there is demand for consumption goods, consumer goods, then only there will be more demand for investment goods. Or else, another demand that we talk about here is in this age of globalization, you can have demand in terms of your exports also, domestic demand as well as global also. That is what we say. So what we are saying ultimately here is that if any economy has to grow in the long term, it must make sure that the poor and middle class people have enough amount of money with them to demand goods and services in the system. Because this ultimately this demand for exports depends on so many factors over which we don't have any control. So then what is the solution? You always have to increase the domestic demand. You can increase the domestic demand only when poor people and middle class people have more income. And the poor and middle class people have more income only when we are able to remove the inequalities. We are able to reduce the inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. As I have mentioned just now, 150 top businessmen in India, top billionaires in India, have seen their wealth going up by 35 lakh crores. Out of that money, how much they have invested? And that is where the problem is. On the other hand, if the same amount of money had gone into the hands of these poor people and middle class people, what they would have done? They would have increased their consumption demand, which could have resulted in revival of Indian economy at a better pace than what it is now. So this inclusive growth, we are trying to say here, what we are trying to say here is that this inclusive growth is necessary. It is very important for what is called sustainable growth. Now, I come back to what RBI has mentioned today. What is the reason why RBI is not saying that in the next 25 years or so we can grow at 9% or 10% per annum? Why? Because whatever the economic growth that is taking place in India is lopsided, with the rich people becoming richer and poor people becoming poorer. So obviously what happens with this kind of economic growth? What happens is that with this kind of economic growth, there will not be any what we call investment consumption demand, and when there is no consumption demand, there will not be any revival of economy. That is the reason why what is required is this inclusive growth. I hope you are getting the point which I am trying to make here. This inclusive growth makes a lot of sense from the perspective of long-term sustainable growth. It is in the interest of the country that we have this inclusive growth, right? Otherwise what happens? Rich people becoming richer and poor people becoming poorer. When the rich people become richer, what is happening is that because of the very high tax regime in India, Most of these rich people are migrating to foreign countries. It is said that since 2014 onwards, in the last 8 years or so, more than by conservative estimates, more than 15,000 rich businessmen in India have migrated to foreign countries. That means they are taking away all these riches to foreign countries, and they will make the developed countries more developed also. And what is required is that we have to make poor people middle class people rich. That is where long-term sustainable growth is possible. And that is the reason why inclusive growth is also important. Another dimension you know, from which we can see this inclusive growth is that it is necessary for from what is called social and law and order point of view, in a sociological perspective and legal in a law and order perspective also. If this kind of growth continues, wherein we have this widening of inequalities between rich and poor people, wherein rich people continues to become rich, whereas poor people continue to the poor people will become poor only. Then what happens here? Then what happens? Then it can result in what we call in law and order problems. What is the reason why we have this Naxalism, communalism, regionalism, secessionism? Why all these are major issues in India? For the simple reason that we have not been able to ensure inclusive growth. We have not been able to ensure inclusive growth. That is the reason why again we need inclusive growth from the perspective of what we call law-abiding societies. From the perspective of implementing rule of law, also we need inclusive growth. These are all the reasons why we need inclusive growth. Now let us proceed further. Look at what are the different dimensions of inclusive growth and what the government is doing and what else can be done. Please remember, all the dimensions of inclusive growth that we are talking about now have been asked in our Indian economy general studies papers. They will keep on asking them. 12th five-year plan, even though it was not implemented, the draft of a 12th five-year plan was named as inclusive growth. Right? Why? Because this process of liberalization, privatization, globalization, this process of liberalization, privatization, globalization, has definitely resulted in rapid economic growth. For the first time, thanks to LPG, we have achieved what we call a 9% growth rate also. But unfortunately, it has not led to inclusive growth. One of the major weaknesses of capitalism is that it can ensure rapid economic growth but not inclusive growth. We have seen why inclusive growth. Let us proceed and look at what are different dimensions of inclusive growth. So, as you can see it on the screen here, what are the different dimensions of inclusive growth? First and foremost, inclusive growth has to be job-led growth. Why? Because only when people have jobs, only when people have jobs can they have more income. Only when people have more income can we say that we are reducing the inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. And if you look at the present condition of India, what do we say? If you look at the present condition of India, it is getting difficult for us to ensure inclusive growth, because whatever the growth that we are achieving now is what we call it as a job-less growth. This is the problem with our growth rates. Yesterday we have spoken about this in a very, very extensive manner. The reasons for job-less growth. Everything in it is a part of what it is a vicious cycle, as we have mentioned yesterday. So the first and foremost thing that the government has to do is that it has to make sure that whatever the growth that takes place, it would result in creation of more jobs. And this is the most difficult part for any government. Since the independence, as we have discussed in our previous classes, none of the governments have really focused on this very important task, job-led growth. If you remember, in 2014, our Prime Minister, in before the elections, has promised 2 crore jobs every year over a period of 5 years. Right? Between 2014 and 2019, the government would have created 10 crore jobs. But what happened? 2019, the survey had come, done by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. It has mentioned that unemployment rate in India is the highest in the last 40 years or so. The last time we had that kind of unemployment rate was a long time back in the 1970s. And after that, we have seen again the same kind of unemployment rate, clearly signaling the fact that what we are having is a jobless growth. And one more example I would like to quote here. Again, you must be reading newspapers. In the last few days, most of the newspapers are reporting about this fact that labor force participation is coming down in India. Labor force participation, it is coming down in India, right? Right, Saurabh, everything has to be done simultaneously. We are not in a situation wherein we can decide what is first and what is next. We cannot afford those kind of step-by-step growths. What we have to do is we have to do the things in a simultaneous manner. I will talk about what needs to be done. Just wait for a little bit time. I will talk about it. So the labor force participation in India has come down, which is a very dangerous signal. Why? Because most of the people are not wanting to be part of labor market also. They are not wanting to be part of labor market also because they are withdrawing themselves voluntarily from labor markets. They are withdrawing themselves voluntarily from labor market. They do not want to be part of the labor force. Why? Because they have resigned to their fate that they will never be able to get employment. They will never be able to get employment. The condition is so bad, so depressing that they are not. They realize that they are not able to get employment. After Corona, also not much has changed. The 2 years of Corona. That is the reason why job-led growth becomes very important. Next, farmers' income. Even now, also, if you look at it, 50% of our employment comes only from agriculture. Even though the contribution of agriculture in our GDP is coming down drastically, but the number of people dependent on agriculture is still very, very high. Right? 50% of our employment is provided by agriculture. So if we have to ensure inclusive growth, what we have to do is we must double farmers' income. Of course, in 2017, the government of India had come out with this policy of doubling farmers' income. Unfortunately, this was not done because these kind of policy measures can be successful only when the government comes out with a proper planning regarding how to do the things. If you remember, when we discussed this agriculture topic, if you have to double farmers' income in 5 years, you have to increase agricultural output by at least 14% every year in 5 years. And what is the average increase in our agricultural output in the last few years? Between 3.5% to 4%. That means you have to double it, or in fact you have to increase it by more than 3 times also, almost 4 times. Is it possible? That is the reason why it becomes important. Even now also, going by 2011 statistics, 2011 population census, even now also almost 67% of our population lives in rural areas. So if you have to achieve inclusive growth, there is no other way that you can do so by ignoring what we call rural development. You must develop rural areas because 70% of our population still lives in rural areas. Unless you develop rural areas, it is not possible to have inclusive growth. Next, another dimension of inclusive growth is development of small scale industries. What we call them nowadays with the name MSMEs. Micro, small and medium enterprises. Because they are labor intensive and they provide a huge amount of employment to people and they can ensure inclusive growth. Because as we discussed yesterday also, service sector does not provide employment to people. Service sector can help you increasing your GDP, exports and everything else, but it will not provide employment to people. The real employment can be found in these small scale sectors only. And that is where the government has to think about them, how to develop them. MSMEs. That is what the next point also I have mentioned. Another dimension of this inclusive growth is ecological sustainability. Ecological sustainability. As we said, all over the country right now, what we are witnessing is the gruesome impact of climate change. In the month of March and April, we are witnessing the kind of temperatures. We are witnessing the kind of temperatures that we have never seen in the last so many years. Why this global warming has become a reality much sooner than expected. Otherwise, when people used to talk about global warming, they used to talk about 2050, 2100 and like that. And we used to be complacent, thinking that it will be a very long period of time. But it has come now, in front of us now. Yesterday in Gujarat itself, I think in one of the places in Gujarat, the temperature was almost 48 degrees. In the month of April itself, can you imagine? Why these things are taking place? For the simple reason that we have completely failed. We have deliberately ignored. We have criminally neglected this ecology, and we are paying the price. And as we said, it is a vicious cycle. We are paying the price. And who will be adversely impacted? Poorest sections of our society. Poorest sections of our society. Poor people are the ones who are adversely impacted by these ecological disasters. Please remember, rich people, they can survive. They can easily survive. It is not at all problematic for them. Ultimately, it is the poor people who will be adversely impacted. Right? That is the reason why ecological sustainability is a very important part of what we call inclusive growth. And due to global warming and also due to various other factors, due to corona crisis and everything else, it is said that more than 1 billion people in the world again went below poverty line, according to United Nations. And that is the reason why again inclusive growth becomes very important. And this inclusive growth, another dimension of inclusive growth is what we call development of this social sectors. And that is what the next point also talks about. You have to transform this demographic bulge into demographic dividend. That is very, very important. And how can you transform demographic bulge into demographic dividend? How can you make sure that at least 50-60% of your population are skilled population who can get jobs in the private sector, what we call productive employment? That is only by focusing on two important sectors, education and health. That is where we talk about the reforms in these sectors. Right? Then only we can have this inclusive growth. Then only we can have inclusive growth. Next important dimension of inclusive growth is infrastructure. You can have rapid economic growth and development. It is said that I repeat, it is said that if India can grow at 9% per annum for at least a period of 20 years continuously, then you would solve the problem of poverty in your country. You would ensure inclusive growth. You would reduce, if not eliminate, the inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth. All these things, they require at the end of the day infrastructure. You cannot achieve such rapid growth 9% without infrastructure. Infrastructure in the form of roads, in the form of electricity, in the form of drinking water, in the form of communications, in the form of irrigation. This is what is required in the form of buildings. Now you can see here again, come to today's only. Right now, almost every state in India is now facing serious power crisis, which we have witnessed almost 8 months back. The problem is that as people of our country, we have a very important weakness. We have very short-term memory. We always forget the things that happened in the past. So when the country was facing those severe power crisis around 8 months back, due to our mismanagement of our coal reserves, there was a lot of hue and cry at that point of time. Now everything went back to normal. Now again we are facing the same kind of problem. Why? Because no country can develop without infrastructure, basic infrastructure. No country can develop without basic infrastructure. And it is this infrastructure, for example, take the case of farmers. How can we double farmers' income? Only when having infrastructure. We need roads in rural areas, all-weather roads. We need warehouses. We need cold storage houses. We need better communication facilities, so that farmers can benefit out of all this infrastructure. That is the reason why another important thing that is required infrastructure. One of the important reasons why we do not see the revival of a private sector investment in India is because of the fact that we face a lot of problems related to infrastructure, especially private sector in India. Right now, in states like Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, the industries were asked to go on a power holiday in a week. They are provided electricity only for 5 days or 4 days in a week. Remaining 3 days, it is power holiday. Can they survive with this kind of infrastructural bottlenecks? Obviously not. And what they have to do? Because they cannot employ people and they can keep on paying the salaries without producing output, then they will retrench and it results in more unemployment. This is the kind of interlinkages that we talk about. That is the reason why infrastructure development is very important. Right? Next one is that we can ensure inclusive growth when the focus is on creating employers than providing employment to people. This is what we discussed yesterday also. It is not possible for the government to provide employment to people, every person. That is the reason why at the end of the day, programs like NREGA at best can be called welfare programs. They are not part of capital expenditure. We have been implementing NREGA since 2005 onwards for the last 17 years. And we have spent lakhs of crores of rupees on this NREGA. What did we achieve? Nothing. Because it's only a welfare scheme at the end of the day. Every year the government is providing 100 days of employment. For how long? How many years? As long as they are unemployed. Instead of finding out why they are unemployed, it is like this in the medical terminology. That is what we say. You are getting heart attack, and the doctor is advising you to take take a paracetamol for heart attack. When the problems are structural, you cannot find solutions to these problems through this providing bomb in the form of NREGA. If more number of people are seeking employment under NREGA, we should feel ashamed about it, because we have not been able to provide employment to the people. So when the Congress party says that our Prime Minister criticized NREGA, but we are this NREGA had come to the rescue of the people, they should also feel ashamed. They ruled the country for 60 years and they could not provide employment to the people also. Next, Another important dimension of this inclusive growth is that another important way through which we can achieve inclusive growth is through what we call development of agro-processing industries, right? Agro-processing industries, right? This is very important because this is what we call a sunrise industry in India at this point of time. Because this agro-processing, will add a huge amount of will have huge amount of value addition to the output, and there is a lot of export potential also. Next dimension of inclusive growth, it was not here, you can also write about that point. We have to ensure balanced regional development, because as we have mentioned in the beginning, only 3 states in India accounted for almost 90% of FDI. This cannot be done, and they do not include the most populous states in India. In Hindi, derisively we call them as Bimaru states, right? We cannot have a situation wherein only very few states are developed. We cannot have a situation wherein we are creating islands of prosperity in an ocean of poverty. That is the reason why, again, we need inclusive growth, balanced regional development. Now, proceeding further, as you can see it on the screen here, what are the major challenges to inclusive growth? Why this inclusive growth is problematic? What are the major challenges to inclusive growth? Why it is problematic? Let us see what are the major challenges to inclusive growth. So, first and foremost, you can see here population explosion. Our population is increasing. We have not stabilized our population. Some states in India have stabilized, but the most populous states in India are yet to stabilize their population levels. China has done it long time back. In fact, China's population is going in the opposite direction. That is the reason why now China is encouraging people to have more population also. But in India's population, if you look at it, in the global population, our population is almost 18%. We have 18% of global population and we have only 2.4% of the land. And again, regional inequalities, where per capita population is very high in some of the states. Look at Bihar. In terms of area, Bihar is smaller than the state of Telangana. Telangana has only population of around 3.5 crores, 3 crores or 3.5 crores, not even that also. Whereas population of Bihar is almost 12 crores. That is where the problem is. The density of population is very high, and not only that, overall population is also growing. It becomes difficult to provide, to satisfy the basic needs of the people. Where is the question of education and health? That is the reason why this education and health are considered what we call luxuries by the people in the country. That is the reason why this education and health do not become, they do not become what we call, those issues that would determine, that would influence elections in our country, because they are considered luxuries. So we must control population. Second one is political populism. The most important reason why this inclusive growth in the near future is not possible is because of the fact that every political party in India, every state government in India is indulging in political populism, including the central government. Give everything free of cost to the people. As I said, NREGA, we have spent lakhs of crores of rupees. Had we used that money in a more productive manner, like take this NREGA and provide skills, training in skills to these people, so that they could have started their own businesses, self-employment. We don't do those kind of things. We don't believe in doing those kind of things. Give everything free of cost to the people. If you are giving everything free of cost to the people, then where is the money for investment? Where is the money for infrastructure? Where is the money for capital expenditure? And where is the question of any sustainable growth? And that is what the next point talks about, high levels of subsidies. Take the case of power sector in India. which we are talking about right now, the power crisis in India. Why? The problem is that these you know obviously same Anand, they are similar. Yes, yeah, they are similar, right? If not the same, they are similar, right? High levels of subsidies meant that the government does not have any money to invest in infrastructure. That is what the next point. Yesterday, again, if you happen to see, that is what we have said yesterday in our class also. Since the 1980s onwards, public investment in agriculture has come down drastically. Right? Since 1980s onwards, that is what we have said. Public investment in agriculture has come down drastically, and it has impacted agricultural output also. Why? Because simultaneously we have seen huge amount of subsidies given to the farmers. All kinds of subsidies, fertilizer subsidies, power subsidies, water subsidies, then subsidized credit, then food subsidies. You name it, all kinds of subsidies are given. And when you are giving so much of subsidies, where is the money left with the government to invest in what we call, to invest in what we call uh, infrastructure? And when there is no infrastructure, when there is no capital expenditure, how can we have inclusive growth? As I said, it's a vicious cycle. Next important hurdle to have inclusive growth is high levels of inflation. Right now, that is what India is also experiencing. Inflation is the worst kind of tax imposed on the people. And what happens with inflation? Automatically with the inflation, what happens is, more people would be going below poverty line. You can see now wholesale price index is almost 17-18%, which is very high. Consumer price index almost reached 7%. It will go further high also. Right now, you can see that thanks to this Russia-Ukraine war and other global conditions, it is not possible for us to reduce inflation in the near future, in spite of whatever may be the policies of the central bank of the country, that is Reserve Bank of India. Next reason is that these economic cycles like recession and depression. Even before Corona has struck, you must remember, even before Corona has struck, India was in a recessionary condition. For 10 successive quarters, Indian economy was going down. India was growing at around 8% per annum in 2016, right? By 2019, 2020, the first quarter of 2020 and last quarter of 2019, what happened? Our growth rate was less than 4%, from 8%. It was going down and down and down only. Obviously, when you have this recession and continuous this recession, which can easily transform into depression, automatically it will have a very adverse impact on inclusive growth. And of course, the next one is, as I said, once in a lifetime disasters like Corona. As I said, as RBI recently estimated, today only you have seen the newspapers. What happened is that thanks to this Corona, it will take India next another 25-30 years to get out of the disaster caused by Corona, right? And it has said that India had lost around 50 lakh crores of in our GDP due to Corona. It is permanently lost. It can never be recovered. That can be coming in the way of inclusive growth. Next, another problem is that economy is always the byproduct of polity. Economy is always the byproduct of polity, and unfortunately, we don't have any visionary leadership, political leadership. We don't have any visionary political leadership, because of which inclusive growth is also not possible. Now, we have seen the major hurdles. Let us see what can be done by the government to ensure this inclusive growth. What can be done by the government? These are all the solutions that we are providing. It does not necessarily mean that the government will follow all these solutions. What can be done? What should be done by the government? So, first and foremost, inclusive growth is possible only when there is growth. That is what you have to realize. When there is growth, then only you can have inclusive growth. So the government must make sure that India moves rapidly on the path of growth and development. At least in the next 5 years or so, we must make it ourselves a target that India should be growing at least 7% per annum in the next 5 years or so, 7 to 8% per annum. Take out this corona kind of because whatever the growth rate that we are witnessing now, it might be because of the low base that was created by corona. So what we are saying here is that we need real growth going back to the previous pre-corona times. We need to have at least 8% growth rate, taking into consideration the pre-corona times. That is what we have to do. And how to achieve that? Simple. Any economist will come up with a very simple but very effective solution. What is a simple solution that they will suggest? This growth is possible only with investment. As we study in economics all the time, whether it is capitalism or socialism, the only way a country can grow is through investment. The government has limited resources for its investment purposes. So the government must encourage private investment. The government must create conducive atmosphere for the private sector to invest. How? The government must create conducive atmosphere by moving towards a low tax regime. The government must have the courage to sacrifice tax revenues in the short term for the overall long-term benefit of the country as well as economy. That is where I spoke about visionary political leadership. For example, as we discussed, when the GST was introduced in 2017, it was decided that the state governments would be provided compensation up to 5 years for any kind of shortfall in the revenues. 2022 is the year this compensation would be ending. Central government has raised its hands saying that they will not be able to provide compensation further. So the state governments are saying that if you cannot provide, let us do one thing. Let us increase the GST rates. Let the GST rates go up from minimum 5% to 8%, and let us move most of the items from 18% to 28% category. This is what I say narrow, extremely narrow short-term perspective. It might help you to increase your revenues to some extent, but it will cause huge amount of adverse consequences. This is where we need political leadership. The state governments must be willing to cut down on their subsidies, on their unproductive expenditure, on their populistic programs, and save money so that they can, use that money to, offset any kind of decline in the revenues. On the other hand, if they prefer these kind of, populistic measures, it will lead to disasters. India has a very, very high tax regime, which comes in the way of, investment by domestic and foreign investors. Then the government cannot waste its time more. It has already wasted 75 years. It is time for the government to take these two core sectors very seriously: education and health. The basic problem with almost the entire political leadership is that they are obsessed with physical infrastructure. They are not at all concerned about social infrastructure. It is time for the government to rectify this anomaly and realize the fact that ultimately it is the social infrastructure that can help you to achieve growth on a sustainable basis in the long term. And this is what we have seen with most of the developed world also. Whereas in developing countries there is a lot of craze for this physical infrastructure. The best example is Sri Lanka, which has taken huge amount of loans to invest in a so-called physical infrastructure, which led to the collapse of its economy also. That is the reason why it is high time the government invest in the social infrastructure. This is another important thing. We must transform our demographic bulge into demographic dividend. This is the only way in which we can have inclusive growth. Next, agriculture. It is time the government takes this agriculture sector seriously and implement what we call second or evergreen revolution. Sustainable agriculture should be the motto of the government. Political parties must have the guts and the vision to cut down drastically all those populistic subsidies which are coming in the way of sustainable agriculture. So these are all some of the measures which are needed to achieve inclusive growth. There are so many other of them. We have seen all of them also. Right? I think we have reached the end of our time, and if you have any doubts, you can ask. And we will be continuing tomorrow. Also, we will be continuing. Tomorrow onwards, I will be taking up more topics related to prelims. And these YouTube classes, the link will be shared on Unacademy Unlock platform, and it will be there in our Telegram group also. Tomorrow onwards, the next 5 days, I will take up mostly topics related to prelims only, whether it is multilateral institutions, whether it is developmental welfare schemes of the government, whether it is current events after this year prelims. I will be taking up all those things. The link will be provided to you in our Telegram groups, as well as it will be there on Unacademy Unlock platform. Best of luck. Any kind of doubts you can always ask. Otherwise, we can end our topic for today.